Thank you. So I have a few questions, but I thought with the last slide that you shared, is it okay if I sort of open up this question of what kind of architect do you want to be to the audience to start?
Myself personally, it was very clear. I want to be the same architect my grandmother was. In the most dire situations, being able to activate and capitalize on our indigenous resources and our ancestral resources to be able to sustain our communities. And I would say we are in a time of crisis. We are a time of environmental crisis. We're a time of social injustice crisis. And I have faith in my foremothers' way. So the kind of architect, if I am lucky, is to become like my grandmother.
And can I open up to the audience for that question? Because I know that there were people that might have been interested in answering that as well.
So guys, what kind of architects? We can dream together, and then we're gonna have to pay rent, all of us, after. Don't worry. Yeah, there.
I think I like starting this degree, I was really trying to explore, that question indirectly as well, like even on co-op or like trying to figure out where I want to go after. And I told myself, okay, I want to be an architect that's good at, considering the emotional sensibilities of people and like creating atmosphere in a space and really thinking from an emotional perspective. But I think I just want to say, like, your presentation really made it more clear, it put in greater like resolution all the emotional skills, like relationality, agency, like care, and all that, and what more it can mean. So I could say that, yeah, I want to be an architect that considers that, and your presentation helped a lot.
Thank you.
So.
But also remember, the emotional is ambience and peace, but also the emotional is grit. The emotional is also resilience. The emotional is struggle, right? These are all emotional states that we need to put into clarity and outside of like the kumbaya perspective. This is hard work, right?
I can answer too, and thank you for your workshop earlier too. I would like to see architecture as a catalyst to environmental and social justice, and as a researcher myself, and as we talked earlier, truly fitting the gap in my positionality as a researcher and architect.
It's so important, right? To those of you who were not there in the morning, we were speaking about the School of Architecture as a machine of social engineering. If you're here, 80% of you, I would say, had never faced food insecurity, housing insecurity. 80% of you are not really struggling or having moderate struggles of having debt that you're probably going to be able to pay. Why? Because the School of Architecture has always been a space that filters in by class. It's usually upper middle class people that end up in a School of Architecture. We don't really, the people who really need this work, need to be part of this work are often excluded by by financial means. It's too expensive, so damn expensive to study in architecture, right? How much is it to print every single studio in every single class? Educational economics makes it that a certain class and a certain economic class can be here. There is also a cultural aspect to it. So there is a sensibility and style that only those specific class can do. The sleek lines, the certain kind of render that is not stylistically compatible with different communities. When their portfolios end up on the admissions office, they end up in the no pile. So our schools have always been doing this job of social engineering. Only those who get access are those who are already privileged. So it's a reproduction of elitism. And then our, as you said, it's our position that we understand, and then it's our responsibility that even from a position of from a position of privilege, we are able to have enough imagination to understand the struggle and declare our allyship to it and declare our position from it. Who do we want to serve? Who deserves your talents? Thank you so much for this reflection.
Oh, we have a question there.
Thank you very much, Menna. Amazing presentation. I'd like to say that it was a tough question you asked. What type of architect? It's a constant question you have to keep asking yourself in our journey. It's not just one time. I was just trying to ask myself what kind of architect do I want to be? And everybody wants to design the skyscrapers, the fantastic building, the latest technology, but who wants to go very humble, to actually design for those people who actually don't have money to pay you for your service? So I just wrote down a few things. My humanity first. I want to be able to put, I would say I want to fit two sides of the spectrum. I obviously want to design the high-rise, make the money, but then still be able to, be so low and humble, not to actually cater for those who actually, can pay me. I want to be able to put a smile on people's faces, know that I've been able to put my skills and my design abilities, to help people. I remember Malawi is one very good school. I've had to do some competitions, to propose schools because I've had the privilege to be educated. These are people who don't have a school, who don't have a place to live. So, I'm usually very touched that I treat like my brother's comfort is my comfort. That's the kind of architect I want to be. Thank you.
Thank you. And truly, the bubbles are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're going to suffocate us. This is why we need to break them and insist on creating kinships as we work. Insist on entangling ourselves, right? Instead of just engaging and leaving after. So it's also self-preservation. We don't want to get stuck in bubbles and end up isolated and lonely within this practice. Just with our computers, just copying file after file after file and asking ourselves, so what are we doing other than reproducing, right? And I think students of architecture have been doing that in the past few years by pushing for different pedagogies, by asking for new hires. I was the University of Carleton's first spatial justice hire. Why? Because our DWG, the Diversity Working Group, insisted and lobbied our director to hire somebody to offer the pedagogies they need. They said nobody here is able to address or deal with the pressing issues in our society. So the universities all over the world had these racial justice and spatial justice hires and hired people like myself. You know why? Because the university has no social relevance, because it doesn't know how to address pressing social issues. So people like myself end up being hired by the street, because the street pushed and made it. This is the grassroots is what even allows us to be in these spaces. And I think architecture students, from their position as students, act as a grassroots power to change their pedagogies and how architecture then looks after them. So I think you guys and your peers have been doing a good job. Somebody here had their hands raised. No? Did I imagine it? It was just a flicker of light? I don't know, that thing is in my eye.
Were there any questions as well? Fred, you can edit this part out.
Any questions?
I wanted to actually remind you that, hi. We're all here in this together, and tomorrow we're going to be in class together too. But these are really interesting questions, and I'm urging you, to, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, but also be vulnerable. You need not answer the question or know what the answer is. So I just wanted to remind you that it's just us here.
Yeah, we can speak about anything,
Oh, and you too.
Thank you, Menna, for a fantastic presentation. Fantastic presentation that felt like therapy to me, honestly, because as a person who shares many similar things, background-wise, education-wise, obstacles-wise, et cetera, I felt like finally there is somebody who has done a proper research that's actually addressing the emotional aspect of our job, not only as researchers, but also as practitioners. So thank you so much for that. My question to you is, it may sound like a silly question,
Love those.
but usually when I was driving here today, I was listening to a podcast about men and women, and usually women are the ones associated with love, care, emotions, et cetera, and men are associated with other qualities that we all know. As a woman who presented role model women in her work and now leading this job, do you find, leading this whole wonderful effort, do you find that your positionality as a woman has a lot to do with your track of your research and career? And if so, given all the men that you dealt with, is there any difference in the dynamics? Like, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Absolutely. I'll tell you why. So if you go to the Nubian community, the Nubian General Club, which is our center in the city, basically our official governing body in the city. It's a club that all Nubians are associated to. You're going to find a long wall of remembrance of Nubian men. Not one single woman is mentioned to it. The entire board is men. The state created or the state produced board structures within Nubian villages have a structure of 1 to 10 men to women ratio. So every 10 men, there has to be 1 woman as a quota, right? Not more, it's just that. So my community has been moving towards male supremacy very hard in the past 50 years since our displacement. However, I had the privilege to be born and to be raised within the household of women. So I got that insight and that knowledge, and I got to recognize and understand and appreciate their work because I got to see it. While boys, if I had a brother, he would have been in the male-dominated spaces and would have never got the chance to learn about the brilliance of his grandmother unless he really brought himself back to the house. And the discounting of women's work and the discounting of the emotional also comes with the colonial project, and it comes from the larger project of the Enlightenment that recognizes the world in this one universe and its values, and anything else is inapt. But the issue around women is well documented. Actually, the work of women is not discounted because it's lower value work. It's discounted because it's women's work. The former Minister of Finance, the former Greek Minister of Finance, Yanis Varoufakis, was speaking about this economic phenomena of discounting work just because women are doing it by looking at the judicial system in Greece. And the judicial system in Greece has some transformation and gender equity struggles by feminists in around the 1980s, 1990s. And then now the judicial system is full of women judges. Now the judicial system in Greece is looked down upon just because it's filled with women. So it's not because the work is not important within society. The fact that women are doing the work because women are seen as discounted humanities, it becomes discounted work. So I'm not going to subscribe to that. I am a woman myself. I'm not going to discount. I'm not going to be a participant in digging my own grave and colonizing myself. I will sit there proudly and speak about my grandmothers. And also, I go into these lectures and speak about my grandmothers, and I see people, I see prominent architects, like, this is not serious work. Think about, they basically politely tell me that this is not serious work. I don't care. I'm not here for validation. I do not need the acknowledgement. I have seen the result. I have receipts of getting capital out of thin air by these women's work. And I've been trying to do that for the past few years in Ottawa. And we start with very little capital, and the output is really, it is valued as at much more than what we started with because of all our involvement and engagement into it. So yeah, as women, just because we're women, our work is going to be discounted. And unfortunately, we know that. And we have to fight it. And our allies, people, our men, our male allies, our non-binary allies need to understand that this is a part of how gender is constructed within within hierarchy. Is that there is man, there is white man, and then there is everything underneath it. It's a vertical system, and we need to kind of disrupt that and destroy it. Thank you for the question. Come on, guys, ask questions. We can speak about anything. We can gossip about exes, anything.
First, I want to say thank you for coming and speaking with us. I really appreciate it, and having someone with like your research is really valuable. And I wanted to ask that, would you consider the responsibility of the architect, or I guess the North American architect, to be a translator for the unacknowledged architects and designers like your grandmother? So the people who have been like designing spaces for communities, but without that kind of credibility that is given in our like kind of capitalist colonial society. And is it more important to use our position within this like system to elevate those designers and their voices, and because they're not given opportunities to be architects of their spaces and their communities? So kind of along the lines of like relationality beyond just like empathizing and hearing, and then you come up with the design. Like, is it more important for architects to be that translator where the communities make the design and we just translate it into the physical space or in the system?
I don't understand your question. Do you mean, is it our job to be material translators to existing community work? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of.
I think it is, because we are at the tip of this. Like the problem with our practice sometimes it's that it's severed from existing momentum. There is existing momentum. You just need to give it an envelope. All your role here is to give it a materiality of care. This is what they need from you. And as architects, sometimes we are so taken by our own ego as a creator. We go into this space and produce and kind of develop a God complex, right? We're creators. We create things, right? Do we really create things, or do we manifest what the momentum that has been produced? Are we aligning ourselves to existing projects and doing our job in materializing? And translating is a word for it. We can use the word translating, but while we translate, we cannot be disassociated. And I say this, and I know that people in actual language translation now researchers are speaking about the translator can never be disassociated, because language is embodied. Language is, you cannot really disassociate from language. It's already implicating you into this. Anyways, the other one is about our role to elevate. No, it's not. Our role is to denounce the system where we exist and join the work that has actually been potent enough to sustain our communities. And by the way, think about diverting resources to that work. What happens if instead of doing this work with a little funding, and a little help and very little time in the summer, of having enough funding and enough collective action, all the volunteers here are able to get paid within the project and have a decent life, and all of us working towards this. What appears on the other side? What kind of architecture? So it's not us just trying to carve spaces and make a pantry here and a community kitchen there and a community market here. It's actually giving us access to larger impact. So the fact that the grassroots has this small carving impact is actually because it's suffocated within the system. It's not allowed to do larger work. There are grassroots initiatives that are making cities. Italian cities have so many stories of housing initiatives that are grassroots generated and community governed. It's not just something that's a cute thing for the small projects we have. We do these small projects because this is the only space we can carve within the suffocation of that capitalist system. But in our role is to join that work, not elevate them. Because elevate them means we understand ourselves to be higher. And we understand them to be lower, and we need to elevate them. You see this spatial even construction of value we already internalize when thinking about this work. It's traditional. We use all these discounting kind of cultural dog whistle words like inclusive, traditional systems, but also when we speak about indigenous people, think about traditional architecture. I'm sorry, is modernism not a traditional architecture? Are skyscrapers, is concrete not traditional? Is like steel structures are not traditional? It's traditional and historical. But it's this language that isolates in place and time the efforts between us, or the understanding between us and the people we want to align with. So we have to be very aware of how we imagine that relationship. Thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you.
I'm going to run around. Oh, Kenya first, I think. And then...
I can't see you.
Hi, Menna.
Hey.
Thank you for the lecture. It was really,
Thank you.
really good. I love your passion.
Thanks. African passion there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really like what you said earlier about like suffering of people and designing for that. This was in the morning, about how you don't really need to pass through suffering. You just have to understand it, soak it in to design for that. And I don't know, I've been thinking about that. While we can actually, like, say for accessible people, you can't just become disabled, right? To really understand that suffering, what strategies have helped you from your experience to really understand who you're designing for and how to make the world a just place for them?
Flip labels. So I have learned this from our amazing colleague in disability justice, Professor Fedi Schnudem, is that you don't have a disability, you are disabled by the world around you, right? Flip it around. We're all enabled. So think about us as enabled and start critically. So when we start speaking about these categories, we need to flip the script on the system. So are they disabled? How? And then if they're disabled, we're enabled. Okay, they're not the problem now, it's us. So we're enabled. Why? Why are we enabled? Right? So if you read literature on crip futurism or crip theory, it has this theory of embodiedness that speaks about disability or disability studies as a form of resistance. Disability, people are disabled because the spatial system is retaliating against them because they denied the system their labor. Within their bodily functions, they deny what the system considers a full functioning body, and they deny that labor to the system. And in return, they are disabled by the spatial manifestation of that system. Which on the flip side means me and you are enabled. Why are we enabled? So always when we think about these categories, we need to take a critical distance and not take any of these terms at face value. We learn these terms and take them, but people within queer studies, disability studies, Black studies, take these terms and interrogate them. And out of that interrogation, we know exactly why these terms are produced to be this way, and then what is our position from them, right? So if you're going into a thesis project, I know in the morning you were interested in that, I would start reading crip theory. I would start at that point. What do disabled people, how do disabled people understand their position? Crip theory is queer disability studies. So I would start there.
Thank you.
Thank you. In a world where you have to do a market survey, look at prospecting areas, as an entrepreneur, you have to consider the system where you're in and the reality of things. And assuming, from your personal experience, assuming you made up your mind the kind of architect you want to be, to be community driven, to be just, to do all that you shared about, how do you balance when the reality of life fights you back, like a system like bills just hits you hard, and how do you balance this from your experiences? How do you make money, serving the people? Thank you.
Which ones? Because we had a lot of horrible things happen. We had a tornado during one of our projects. So if you mean the struggle with the system, you're always in pushback. That's why emotional work is hard work. You're always pushing and fighting for this permit and fighting for this piece of land they allow you to use it, fighting for this right of way to not be considered as property line so that people can walk in it. So you are always in these constant fights. So the notion of clarity is important, but also has to be always critically taken. Is it clarity, or did I settle into an idea? So I always have to have clarity. So am I clear about what am I doing here? Yes. And then I ask myself, is it clarity, or did I just settle into an idea and not critiquing it anymore? So there is this cycle of reflexivity that just keeps going when you're working, but while you're reflexively thinking, you're pushing and you're doing the work. So it's like a cycle of thinking and reflecting, and a line of pushing and trying to do the work as you go. But in general, the rule of thumb is shit happens. You always have to expect that. The public foods project that we had? Midway in the project, when half of the trusses were up, a tornado happened in Ottawa. It was my first year in Canada. Tornado. Fun. It destroyed the entire project. I had all my students into this office room right across from our site. We saw the project get destroyed in front of our eyes. So, I mean, who do you blame for this? Our construction lead, Josh Eckert, was flipping the bird to God all day, but it's this idea of shit happens. Struggle is going to rise when you're working systemic, environmental, and so on, and you have to always have the acumen and the strength, emotional work, to be able to overcome and do something and try again. And as Pickett says, fail again and fail better.
I had a question about language. Language and the role of language came up both in your presentation and also in your reflections on the questions. And I often wondered if we underestimate language in the power it has to shape our worlds and also influence the way that we practice or exist in spaces of design. And so you were quite critical in using language, the language of something like care, for instance. Community is another word that I think gets used quite often and more recently, and doesn't have the same weight or the same meaning as we might want it to. I think the word love as well has a similar challenge. I wondered, knowing the importance of language, how do we challenge the way we approach conversation or the way we approach words?
I think there are two layers to this, right? There is an ontological layer, an existential layer, that starts by me reminding you, my fellow North American people, is that life does not exist in English everywhere, right? We all speak in different languages. I translate everything into English as I speak. I think in other languages and then speak. So I don't think in English. And when we are in other languages, we are in other world. We are in other fields of meaning. That's one side. And with that, when we speak about language and its existential position, we remember that actually buildings, cities, imagined places exist in the imagination and words before they exist in materiality. So we speak of places before we build them, right? So that layer of speaking, and even speaking in our language as architects, which is drawing, because drawing is our lexicon, drawing is our language. Speaking in these, in the literary or literal language, or speaking in our visualization, language of visualization, happens way before the building or the built environment is actually realized or materialized. So that is a critical position. If you are not in a point of awareness at that level, at that kind of level of, that cerebral level of understanding the city, our position from it, understanding all the terms that we use irresponsibly, the community is used so irresponsibly, which takes me to the other aspect of the points that you have raised. Abdication of our responsibility to interrogate notions and categories. Community, what kind of community? I went to Carlton's meeting for community engagement, and then there was a table for the tech community. Like there is like a small Silicon Valley-like thing in Kanata, they are the tech community. I'm like, okay, so this is not really what I thought I'm coming to join, right? The developers community. And then the word community becomes this floating term, stripped from all its meaning. And now we have to be very diligent when we say community. What do we mean? Anything can be a community. It can be a community of criminals, right? Like the finance community, they are a community of criminals. So when we speak about community, what do we mean? Which community? What are their names? Who they are? How do we relate to them? What do they like to eat? When is our next, are we having a Ramadan iftar together? It has to contextualize. And with that, we develop our understanding. So when we speak about XYZ community, we speak about something real, not abstract, right? And there is this fantastic paper by Fernando Luis Lara on abstraction, titled Abstraction is a Privilege. And in architecture, we claim that privilege all the time. Abstraction is the privilege to disassociate. Inclusion of whom, by whom, who has the power to include, who is the one who doesn't have the power to be included. Do they get the power to also be the person who does the inclusion? Like what is it? How this abstraction and assigning values to things and abdicating our responsibility in interrogating these categories becomes very detrimental to the work that we end up doing eventually. So as architects, there's so much responsibility to do critical work. Our brains, it's probably, we need a lot of vacation time to turn off our brains and have kind of family time that doesn't have to deal with all these issues. So just to heal, but while we are working, while we are in our position working, we need to have we need to be able to do this intellectual work all the time. So are we working with community? What does it mean for us? Are we doing engagement? What does that mean? What is the difference? Are we always going to be engaged? Is there a wedding coming? What is this? So I feel like we are just sometimes too tired, so we just take things at face value and forget that language comes way before the building. Thank you so much for the question.
I think we have time for one or two questions, and I am being mindful.
There's one behind you.
About the fact that the pizza's here, and I know there are people.
I can smell it. Is iftar time already?
If you're hungry
Is
to
it
go.
Adhan? Please, for those of you who are fasting, get food. We can still speak when you're eating.
I think that, we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I know your mom said do not speak with food in your mouth. That's okay. I'm not going to tell her. Just get food and come back. Go get food and come back. I can smell it from here. Like, I am tempted to go get food and come back. Please do.
Thank you so much for your lecture, and I could really relate with your story and from my personal history, and I really enjoyed it. I would like to ask you a question about how do you think can we reimagine unknown North American idea of home?
That's not unknown. Indigenous people know it very well. We just invisibilize them. They know it very well. Go speak to an elder. You're going to know they know this. Indigenous elders have so much clarity about the notion of space. You think, why the hell is this my curriculum? Why is this not something that we learn every day? It's just that we invisibilize it. Remember, colonial projects, settler colonial projects come with projects of epistemicide. Epistemicide is the erasure, is the killing of fields of meaning and knowledge. So it's also as architecture educators, it's our job to make sure that these fields of meaning and knowledge are alive and well in our classrooms. So hopefully ask for that, interrogate your syllabi, and ask for the input of Indigenous elders. Do you want to learn about Indigenous space? Well, you already have expertise here. You have David here, David Fortin, and you have many Indigenous architecture professors now in all universities of Canada. At our school, we have two. We have Professor Omiyasu Apasu and we have Professor Jake Shakasam. And with that, every year we have a huge Indigenous event when we halt the entire school and we just learn from elders. Just no education. We call it feast. And we just learn from the Indigenous feast. We just learn from elders and then eat at the end of the day.
Thank you so much.
Is the pizza good? It's good, huh? Yeah. I can smell it. It's so good, yeah. كلي حاجة واحدة مش طعيمة طب كويس. يا ستي.
Sir, does anybody have any other questions?
Any more questions, guys?
I guess through your work and through our discussion today, we sort of discuss like care work and like the transfer of emotional capital like in parallel. But would you say, I guess, would it be fair to say that care work cannot exist without emotional capital?
Yes, because care is emotional work.
By extension, would you say, I guess, the reason why care, or one of the reasons why care work can be so backbreaking and exhausting is because of that emotional transfer?
It's a cyclic economy, okay? So and I'm sorry to go back to Bourdieu's theory of capitals. I do not condone Pierre Bourdieu in any way, but the notion of capital is actually apt, and it starts at Marx. Again, do not condone Marx in any ways. By the way, the African womanhood's position from Marx has nothing to do with like the right-wing position from Marxism, but African scholars, Afro-womanists have been trying to kill Marx for years, but we're not very successful at it. Anyway, this went into a very theoretical tangent. However, what we were talking about? Yeah, in capital. So the cyclic economy, so here's where we are. Let's imagine it's an economy. You write a book, right? You transfer your intellectual capital into a book that has cultural capital in it because it has all this knowledge that's culturally relevant. It's capital because the collective recognizes it as capital, right? So within this economy, the book gets sold and you make money. That's material capital, right? So that's a cyclic economy. Economies are often cyclic. They run in circle. It's not one circle, it's just a bunch of circles. It's resources that are recognized as potent and valuable get transformed into different forms of capital and so on. There is social capital, so you're pretty popular, and then because you're pretty popular, everybody is inviting you to eat, so you're not really spending any money on lunches. That's a kind of a material capital that comes out of your social capital, you know? The issue with emotional capital is that within the Nubian economy, it was already embedded in the cyclic economy, right? It translated. These women were immediately recognized as builders and was highly revered within the community. Within the systems where we are, it's very hard to shove that and get that recognition and get it as a part of the cyclic economy. And this is why it's exhausting. And it's labor that we need to do. So think about it in not as a thing that sits or stands alone. It's something that has to sit in a system that recognizes its value and allows it to translate into different manifestation of value. You know what I mean? Does that make it clear? So this is why it becomes hard, because it's not recognized and you have to do the work to make it recognized as well. Like, public food, public foods is working because it was on CBC. I didn't even know what CBC is at that time. I was new to Canada. Like, what is that? I don't know. So because it was a CBC, that means it had cultural capital. And that was during construction. And once it became on CBC, everybody wanted to donate something in it. So that cultural capital that was produced by that recognition made it that other capitals were translated and embedded into a process, and then it kind of joined that economy and becomes a point of solidarity, produced a point of solidarity within the cyclic economy. So it's this kind of day-to-day work. We cannot just do it from up top with a theoretical lens. It has to be praxis. Praxis is to think about very hard concepts and try them and see what takes and see how it works, and then go back and analyze them and go back. So you need to be a skilled worker and a brilliant thinker at the same time. Good luck to all of that with that. To all of us with that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the question. It was an important one.
Thank you so much, Menna. It was, I love this discussion. I think we should have more of these types of discussions. And one of the things that I hear a lot from you guys, I mean, we talk about this in class, I've been hearing this for years, is like, for one thing, how can we do that? And there's this kind of sense that I get from you guys that we're in things feel heavy, they feel dark. And a lot of you come to my office and you're like, how do we do this? How do we put like one foot in front of the other? I mean, just the other day, I see you nodding your head, but asking about co-ops, right? How do we choose? And how do we make the decisions about what co-ops we take, right? And I think that what Menna has done today is given us a little bit of light. And I really feel like, given us a sense of actually like what can be done, but also the work we all need to do together, right? And just the work that you do with the students is, like, I'm literally thinking, how do we do that here? I mean, Jalia, of course, actually you do this here at the school, in your studio with the food bank. But how do we do this here more, right? And I think that this is I'd like to think of this as a moment of holding faculty accountable to you guys, to students. And maybe thinking together a little bit about how we can maybe make some of these changes together so that we can like think about what that question really means in concrete terms. Like, what kind of architect do I want to be? And so what this is for me right now is just a recognition that, and I think that Menna really showed us how this can be done, is that faculty also play a role. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation.